Hello, sir. My name is Nurrozaili binti Ramli. Today, I'll be discussing the impacts of colonialism in Malaysia. This presentation will highlight how colonial rule shaped Malaysia's economy, politics, society, and infrastructure. Let's start by defining colonialism. Colonialism is the practice where one nation gains control of another territory through conquest, settlement, economic exploitation. The colonial power typically imposes its political, cultural, and economic systems on the colonized region. Malaysia, known as Malaya during colonial times, experienced several eras of colonial rule. First, the Portuguese began by capturing Malacca in 1511, seeking control over the spice trade. Then they were followed by the Dutch, who took over in 1641. Finally, the British became the dominant colonial power in the 19th century. Among these, British colonization had the most profound and lasting impacts, influencing Malaysia's political, economic, and social structures. When the British colonized Malaysia, they identified its economic potential in natural resources. Two key industries that they actively developed were rubber cultivation and tin mining. These industries were not only vital to the colonial economy but also shaped Malaysia's global economic role. Let's start with rubber. Rubber was a commodity in high demand during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, especially with the rise of the automotive industry. The British encouraged the large-scale cultivation of rubber, introducing modern plantation techniques. In Malaya, as it known then, became the world's largest producer of rubber, supplying nearly half of the global demand. However, the focus on rubber exports primarily benefit British industries, leaving local farmers and workers with minimal economic gains. Now let's turn to tin. Tin was another major export during colonial times, used for making cans and in various industrial applications. Malaya became one of the world's largest tin producers, with British controlling much of the industry. The mining industry contributed significantly to British profits and fueled industrialization back in Europe. Similar to rubber, the tin industry's benefit was skewed toward the colonial powers, while the local economy remained underdeveloped. Both industries were heavily reliant on migrant labor, a key aspect of their development. The British brought in workers primarily from China to work in tin mines and from India to labor on rubber plantations. These workers faced harsh conditions, low wages, and limited rights, yet their contributions were crucial in making these industries successful. This influx of migrant workers also reshaped Malaysia's demographic landscape, leading to the multicultural society that we know today. During the colonial period, the Malaysian economy developed a dual structure. This means that two distinct economic sectors coexist within the same economy. The first one is a modern, export-oriented sector. This sector focused on producing commodities like rubber and tin for global markets. It was heavily supported by the colonial authorities as it generated significant revenue for the British Empire. Number two is a traditional and subsistence-based agricultural sector. This sector involved local communities, particularly the Malay population, engaging in small-scale farming to meet their own needs. This dual structure wasn't accidental. The colonial authorities deliberately reinforced it by prioritizing the development of the export-oriented industries such as rubber plantations and tin mining, while neglecting the traditional sectors. While the colonial era brought many challenges, it also laid the groundwork for Malaysia's modern economy by establishing key institutions and infrastructure. Number one is transportation networks. The British built extensive railways and port facilities to support the export of rubber and tin. Railways connected plantations and mines to major ports like Penang and Port Klang, enabling efficient transportation of goods. Today, these networks remain vital to Malaysia's transportation system and continue to support trade and logistics. Number two, banking and financial systems. The colonial administration introduced a structured banking and financial system to facilitate economic transactions. British and other international banks, such as HSBC, established operations in Malaya, providing credit and financial services that supported commercial activities. These early financial systems laid the foundation for Malaysia's current banking sector, which is now one of the strongest in the region.
Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera. I am Noraya. I will be presenting political impacts of colonialism in Malaysia. Let's start with the colonial history. Malaysia's colonial history is marked by the influence of several powers, the Portuguese, Dutch, British, and Japanese. The Portuguese were the first to arrive, conquering Malacca in 1511. Their primary interest was controlling the lucrative trade routes in the Strait of Malacca. Although they centralized their authority in Malacca, they did not extend their control significantly beyond this port city, disrupting local political autonomy but leaving some traditional structures intact. In 1641, the Dutch took over from the Portuguese, establishing the United East India Company or VOC. Their focus was on trade and military defense rather than territorial expansion. While they maintained control over Malacca, their influence on the broader Malay Peninsula was limited, setting a precedent for centralized control that would later be expanded by the British. The British began their penetrations in Malaya in the late 18th century with significant developments occurring after the establishment of Penang and Singapore. Their colonial rule will last from 1824 to 1941 and again from 1945 to 1957 marked a turning point. The signing of Perjanjian Bangkok in 1874 formalized British authority and introduced the resident system, which significantly altered traditional governance structure. Finally, during World War II, the Japanese occupied Malaya from 1942 to 1945. They promoted the ideology of Asia for Asia, which stirred nationalist sentiment among the local population and encouraged resistance against Western powers. Influence of Western powers on political framework. Colonial administrative structures. The British colonial administrations established centralized governance, replacing decentralized local system, which created a lasting impact on Malaysia political organizations and authority dynamics post-independence. Ethnic-based political policies. Colonial policies institutionalized ethnic divisions, favoring certain groups in governance and economic roles, which entrenched systemic inequalities and shaped Malaysia's contemporary political landscape and identity. Nationalisms and political mobilizations. Repressive colonial measures against nationalist movements inadvertently fueled a desire for self-determination, leading to the emergence of political leaders and parties advocating for independence and democratic governance. Centralizations of administrations and ethnic divisions. Colonial governance structures. The British established a centralized administrative framework that undermined local governance, leading to a loss of traditional authority and creating a bureaucratic hierarchy that marginalized indigenous leaders and communities. Ethnic favoritism policies. Colonial policies favor specific ethnic groups for administrative roles and economic opportunities, fostering resentment and deepening ethnic divisions that have persisted in Malaysia's socio-political landscape. Legacy of ethnic tensions. The historical context of centralized administrations and ethnic favoritism has resulted in ongoing challenges in national unity as contemporary governance struggles to address the inequalities and grievances rooted in colonial practice.
The enduring legacy of colonialism in Malaysia from the late 18th century to the mid 20th century, British colonialism profoundly shaped Malaysia's social and cultural landscape. The following is the lasting impact of colonialism that influenced on Malaysia, multicultural society, economic development, and social hierarchies. A multicultural society shaped by colonialism, immigration and diversity. British colonial policy encouraged immigration, leading to a diverse and multicultural society in Malaysia. The coexistence of Malay, Chinese, Indian, and other ethnic groups has enriched the country cultural landscape. Cultural syncretism. The interaction between different cultures during colonial time led to the development of unique culture syncretism. This is evident in Malaysia, cuisine, architecture, and traditional practice which blend elements from various ethnic and cultural backgrounds. Here we have social hierarchies and inequalities. First, we have European. Second, we have Eurasian. Third, we have indigenous Malay. A rigid social hierarchy was established during the colonial period, placing European at the top, followed by mixed race individual and indigenous Malay at the bottom. The impact of education and legal system. First, education. The British introduced a Western-style education system with English as the medium of instruction. This was continued to influence Malaysia's educational framework. Second, we have legal system. The British established a legal system based on common law principle, which continued to underpin Malaysia's legal framework. The urban-rural divide. Colonial urbanization. British colonial policy concentrated development and investment in urban areas, leading to a neglect of rural areas. For lasting effect, the urban-rural divide established during colonialism has had lasting effect, with rural areas often facing less access to infrastructure, healthcare, and educational facilities. Ethnic tension and post-colonial policies. Immigration policies. The British encouraged the immigration of Chinese and Indian labour, altering the demographic composition of Malaysia and sowing the seed of ethnic tension. Affirmative action. Effort to address this tension, such as the implementation of affirmative action policies favoring Bumiputra, have aimed to reduce inequalities but have also sparked debate about fairness and national unity.
Section 4 Infrastructure Development Impact of Colonialism in Malaysia. The infrastructure development during British colonialism in Malaysia had significant economic, social, and political impact, largely shaped by the interests of the colonial power. Here are the key points and impact of the infrastructure development during the period. Firstly, transportation network, railway and road. The British built extensive railway and road to support the transportation of raw material like tin and rubber from plantation and mines to port for export. The Kuala Lumpur-Singapore railway line was central to connecting economic hubs. While beneficial for the colonial economy, this network mainly served an interest of the British and did not equally benefit the local population. Second, port and harbour. Key ports like Penang, Singapore, and Port Klang were expanded to support British trade, making Malaysia an essential part of the British Empire global trade network. These ports were primarily designed to serve the needs of colonial economy rather than national development. Third, plantation and agriculture. The British introduced larger-scale monoculture plantation for rubber and palm oil, establishing infrastructure such as irrigation system, warehouse, and factory. This led to the migration of Indian and Chinese workers, but excluded local Malay communities from this labor-intensive industry. Number 4, urban development. Cities like Kuala Lumpur and Georgetown grew rapidly, becoming center of administration and commerce. The British established modern amenities, but this urban development primarily benefited colonial ruler and European settler. Urban areas were segregated along ethnic lines, with Malay generally excluded from modern economic sector. Number 5, impact of indigenous communities and local economies. Indigenous community, including the orang asli, were displaced due to infrastructure projects like plantation and railway. The focus on export-oriented industry created an imbalanced economy, with the indigenous Malay population remaining primarily in agriculture with limited access to modern infrastructure. And the number 6, lasting legacy. British colonial infrastructure development was centered on supporting resource extracting, trade, and administrative control rather than of fostering local economic growth. This created social and economic disparities, as the wealth generated by this development largely benefit the British and other workforce like Chinese and Indian workers, leaving local Malay marginalized. And for the conclusion, British colonialism in Malaysia was economically focused on resource extraction and creating infrastructure that benefited the colonial power. The introduction of modern infrastructure such as transportation and urban centers did not necessarily improve the life of the local population, but instead reinforced the economic and social divide impact that persisted after independence. The colonial strategies, including the divide and rule approach, exacerbated ethnic tension and created long-term challenge for Malaysian development. Thank you.